This is my father, known by most as Dr. Kumar. He was a specialist in trauma and orthopedics and worked as an A&E surgeon for many, many years in Neath General Hospital in Neath. He died in Morriston Hospital on 3rd of August 2023. My father was a tireless worker. He worked day and night in the service of his patients. My overwhelming childhood and teenage memory is of him being called out to the hospital constantly during the night, going to work the next day, and he never ever complained. I've never known anyone who worked so hard. This is an excerpt from the diary that my father kept in hospital. He was being deprived of oxygen. His oxygen was reduced, both the flow and the concentrate. It was reduced so much that his saturations plummeted from 98% to 77%, sometimes lower than that, sometimes 81%, maybe even as high as 85% at times. What they seemed to be doing was to try to force him to take Oromorph and a Ventolin inhaler, which he didn't want to take. They didn't work for him, and he knew that Oromorph made him very drowsy. It was a respiratory depressant after all. However, they would not increase his oxygen, despite his and our repeated requests. According to the British Thoracic Society guidelines, his oxygen should have been kept at 94 to 98%, which is where it was before they reduced it. You can see that my father had written in his diary, "I don't know what conspiracy this is." He had asked the physiotherapist if his oxygen could be increased so that he could sit in the chair for physiotherapy because he was so breathless, but the nurse said no. This is indefensible in my opinion. So he wrote this, and you can see from his handwriting that he was incredibly hypoxic. His hands were shaking, and his handwriting has deteriorated considerably. Here is another excerpt from my father's diary. It shows that his oxygen saturations were being kept at 77%. At this point, there must have been considerable damage occurring to his organs. The nurses said that they didn't want my father to obsess over his oxygen levels, and they turned the monitor away from him so that he couldn't see how low they were keeping his oxygen. My father was a very experienced A&E surgeon, and he had absolutely no say in what they were doing to him. On my father's last day, he told the respiratory consultant how 2 nurses in particular were coming into his room repeatedly during the night and turning his oxygen right down, causing him to wake up, gasping for breath and coughing uncontrollably. He said he didn't know why they were doing it, but that they did it, and that all he wanted was adequate oxygen and to be allowed to sleep at night. Unfortunately, my father was coming under a great deal of pressure to agree to terminal sedation via morphine and midazolam, and his concerns and our concerns about the oxygen were not taken very seriously at all. I even wrote to the CEO for help, but no help was forthcoming. I believe that as a result of the actions of these nurses and also the surreptitious withdrawal of his medication, including his long-term high blood pressure medication, he suffered an aortic dissection on the 2nd/3rd of August 2023. He was told that he had reached the ceiling of care when he developed excruciating chest pain and denied any active treatment. This is Jeremy Vaughan, Chief Constable of South Wales Police. Unfortunately, South Wales Police have never been willing to investigate the circumstances of my father's death. I describe his death as involuntary euthanasia. The matter was reported to them in the immediate aftermath of my father's death, but they basically said that it's my opinion that he was being coerced and deprived of oxygen. I did find out later on that they had a meeting with Swansea Bay University Health Board, but the purpose of the meeting seems to have been to protect the health board, and in fact they told the health board not to share information with me relating to the death of my father. The health board was only too happy to accept this instruction and refused to engage with me after that, leaving me in the dark about exactly what happened in the lead up to my father's death. His condition abruptly deteriorated at night. The nursing notes are woefully inadequate. It looks like there was a flurry of activity after midnight as my father was deteriorating, and that notes that should have been written at about 6 or 7 p.m. in the evening were being written after midnight. I think he was severely neglected that night. So it's really a very unsatisfactory state of affairs, and I'm making this video so that the public know what's going on at this hospital in terms of elderly care, especially because if you have an elderly relative in that hospital, unless you're with them 24/7, which is quite difficult because visiting is limited to 2 hours per day, 1 hour in the afternoon and 1 hour in the early evening, then basically they can do whatever they like to your loved one. And they certainly did whatever they liked to my dad.